The flood, as we have seen, was caused by the opening of the netting of heaven and the fountains of the abyss. The heaven or sky is an expanse for the clouds, strong as molten mirror, Job 37:18, and was made on the second day of creation to separate the waters above from the waters below. Hast thou come to the springs of the sea? Asks God. 38:16. It was formerly the opinion of Christian writers that these springs or fountains are in the central north, confined by the impenetrable walls of ice, which were broken down at the flood. However, when Noah had entered the ark, from heaven and the abyss rushed the waters to fulfill God's purpose to destroy the earth with its inhabitants. Hence the rending of rocks, the shattering of hills, the breaking up of earth's strata, the piling up, mass upon mass, wherein were buried animals and plants to be dug up many centuries afterwards. Excuse me. It's 2:20 in the morning. All lands were filled with the wreck of the old world, a terrible warning to all future ages of the commission of unrighteousness. And let it be noted that the petrifaction of fossils is not surprising, seeing that the earth was wholly sunk under the water for a whole year. Even geologists confess that the degree of petrifaction is no proof of the antiquity of a fossil. The mere amount of change, then, which the fossil has undergone, is not by any means a proof of the length of time that has elapsed since it was buried in the earth, as that amount depends so largely on the nature of the material in which it was entombed, and on the circumstances that have since surrounded it. Jukes, page 190. Quote, Then, what was the origin of the rocks, indeed of the entire earth? Aqueous, according to Genesis 1:1-2, in the beginning of God's framing the heavens and the earth. The earth was in loose atoms and empty. Where were the loose atoms? In the abyss of waters. And God on the third day of creation consolidated all into rocks, stratified and unstratified, causing the land to appear. But why is man not found as a fossil embedded among the rocks, as are the animals? The answer is not difficult. Before the flood, man was not so prolific as now. During the 1,656 years of the Old World there were, according to Moses, only 10 generations counting from Adam to Noah. And Noah, during 600 years, had only 3 sons. However, let us reckon approximately the antediluvian population, allowing 8 children to each couple. First generation, 2. Second generation, 8. Third generation, 32. Fourth generation, 128. Fifth generation, 512. Sixth generation, 2048. Seventh generation, 8192. Eighth generation, 32,768. Ninth generation, 131,072. 10th generation, 524,288. The sum is 699,050. And the whole human population before the flood might not amount to 1/6 of the population of London. Be it remembered that mankind in the Old World dwelt in Asiatic Turkey, speaking the same language, and it was not till after Noah's death that the dispersion from Babel over the earth took place. Asiatic Turkey contains at present 15 million human beings, and there only could fossilized man be found. To what extent, if at all, has that country been geologically examined? Is it possible to deliver men from the spell and sorcery of great names? If only a fable or lie is called scientific, and fathered by a writer reputed a great man, how many thousands believed at once without proof? Is it not as hard to turn men from the worship of their fellow worms as to turn a Hindu from the worship of sticks and stones? The scientific favorites of newspaper scribblers are larded over with flattery, until the reputation of greatness is attained, and to argue against pet scientific fictions is only to provoke silly jesting, or astonishment at the presumption of daring to differ from the scientific slave drivers. Will any of their slaves of science dare to be free, or use their common sense? Is geology not a tissue of suppositions from beginning to end? Let us see. How do the geologists manage to get dupes? Some disguised infidel who has had sufficient influence to obtain a professorship Some disguised infidel who has had sufficient influence to obtain a professorship in a college writes a book about the creation, in which he attempts to prove to the entire satisfaction of atheistic journalists that the world made itself without the help of God at all. Of course, the blasphemous character of the book is carefully veiled, lest soft-headed religionists take alarm, and the book does not sell. Perhaps even a pious whine is dropped so that the work of Judas may be done more effectually, and the author is reputed so very great a man, for all the newspapers say it. By the way of preface, astronomy is appealed to as a science so well established that none but fools object to it. Therefore, the reader must imagine all the vast continents and oceans making up a ball no larger than the schoolroom globe. Next, he is assured that recent researches in science have proved that those lights, the sun, moon, and stars, consist of the very same constituents as the earth and sea, as well as the nebulae, which science supposes to be clouds of glowing gas. So all these must have had a common origin, and therefore the simpleton must next imagine the schoolroom globe, along with the sun, moon, and stars, changed into a quantity of fiery gas. In the beginning, how many million years ago science cannot yet decide, was gas, is the dogma of geology, but he dare not ask about the origin of the gas itself. Then the mesmerist requires him to suppose that all the fiery mass very conveniently began to cool, particularly a quantity in the center, which also whirled about until it became the sun. The victim of duplicity is next set to suppose that other quantities also cooled until they changed into planets. Especially one quantity went on cooling until it very conveniently became the earth ball, with a rocky crust, and though on fire originally, yet a portion of it changed into all the oceans and seas. In the study of science, does Dr. Dick in his book on geology, one is permitted to suppose anything if he will but remember and acknowledge to others that he only makes suppositions, will give reasons to show that his suppositions may be true, and be ready at any time to give up his suppositions when facts go against them. The last of these two suppositions, namely the gradual cooling of the world from a state of intense heat, is often made by those who wish to form to themselves a notion of how the rocks and rivers, mountains and plains of the world have been brought to exist as they are. Page 10. Can the foolish geologists, instead of making these absurd suppositions, not believe the fact that God made the world as stated on God's own authority? Instead, however, of opening their eyes, they further suppose that despite the cooling, as much fire remained inside the ball as heaved up the rocky crust into mountain chains, whilst the waters went on channeling and leveling so as to make all the river and ocean beds. Then the rivers would carry down to lakes and seas matter containing animal and vegetable remains to form sediment, which we must suppose hardened after millions of years into rocks, especially the stratified ones, the unstratified rock being supposed due to the original fire. All these atheistic suppositions are expressed in words of Greek origin, so as to amaze the gaping simpleton. The rocks immediately above the unstratified are called metamorphic. Next, in ascending order, are the Paleozoic, or primary, the Mesozoic, or secondary, the Cainozoic, including the tertiary and quaternary. The guesses about fossils make up paleontology. Now, let it be observed that not one of these suppositions is even probable. Who ever saw gas changed into granite, or a fiery vapor into water, or a river channel its own bed? Is there within the memory of mankind one considerable mountain more or less on the earth, notwithstanding volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, one considerable county more or less, or what continent has materially changed its shape? What do fossils prove? The following is a confession from Skirchley's Geology, page 101. Quote, "So imperfect is the record of the Earth's history as told in these rocks, that we can never hope to fill up completely all the gaps in the chain of life. The testimony of the rocks has been well compared to a history of which only a few imperfect volumes remain to us, the missing portions of which we can only fill up by conjecture. What botanist but would despair of restoring the vegetation of wood and field from the dry leaves that autumn scatters? Yet from less than this the geologist has to form all his ideas of past floras. Can we wonder then at the imperfection of the geological world? Indeed, it is confessed that the age of a fossil is not determined by the degree of its petrification, but by the age of the rock in which it is embedded, and the age of the rock by its position among the strata. Have men in these last days become so silly that with old bones and stones and footmarks they may be led to deny the very God that made them? But was not this folly foretold ages ago by the inspired Hebrew prophets? Each layer of rocks is supposed by a geologist to have occupied an indefinite number of millions of years, and the age of the earth is still more a mystery to them. Professor Thomson, who is a scientific dictator, has, however, announced that the solidification of the earth could not have taken less than 20 million years, and not more than 400 million years, and so that the date of the world's beginning is somewhere between these two numbers. Some time ago, geologists proved from scientific data, to their own entire satisfaction, and that of their dupes, that the earth is a ball of liquid fire with a thin crust of rock, so that at a depth of 25 miles the rocks must melt, and at 150 they would go off in vapor. Dr. Dick's Natural History, page 12. But Professor Thomson has found out that those suppositions do not square with the supposition of gravitation, and accordingly he supposes rather that the mass of the earth cannot be much less rigid than a globe of steel of the same size would be. Yet there must be some quantity of the fiery liquid left in the interior, enough at least to cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. What tinkering the imaginary globe of the astronomer needs! Some geologists, such as Jukes, are not certain whether the earth was a molten mass at first, and whether granite is of igneous or aqueous origin. Formerly rocks were classified as primary, transition, secondary, tertiary, recent, but now by a new arrangement the transitionary rocks are denied any place in the series. Jukes says that he holds views with regard to the Devonian period which differ from those taken by most geologists, and that the question is hardly yet settled, page 203. Also, regarding the stratified rocks, he observes that at one time it was thought that there was some essential distinction in the nature of these rocks and their mode of formation. It is now known or thought that the primary rocks when first formed were exactly like the corresponding secondary and tertiary. That at one time it was thought that there was some essential distinction in the nature of these rocks and their mode of formation. It is now known that the primary rocks when first formed were exactly like the corresponding secondary and tertiary, page 202. Indeed, is there anything certain about geology except that it is disguised atheism, denying God, the Creator? Geologists profess to prove extinct species. Of course, they can produce large bones to show that at one time there were large elephants and lizards, but are big dogs not dogs as really as little ones? Is it a fact, according to Moses, there were human giants before the flood, and that since the lower animals have degenerated in size and age as well as men, need not surprise this 19th century of crime and infidelity? But the trick of comparative anatomy is to claim with an old bone the power of reproducing the sketch of the entire animal, though formerly unknown. If the monkey had been unknown to Darwin and the scientists, would they have been able by seeing one hand only to tell that that beast has 4 hands? If zoologists think the serpents once had wings or feet, let them read Genesis 3:14. On thy belly shalt thou go. Let scientists, ere concluding that any kind of animal has become extinct, consider the words of Jukes himself. Quote, as all the truth about anything whatever is absolutely unattainable by us, it would only lead us astray if we required it from geology, or reasoned as if we had attained it, page 202. But recently the existence of the gorilla became known. What of the Leviathan, the swift serpent, the crooked serpent, the dragon that is in the sea? Isaiah 27. Is it not chiefly the fossilized bones of the sea serpent that geologists are exhibiting as the remains of extinct species of a vast size? No wonder the present existence of the Leviathan is so eagerly denied. S. Lang, in his Modern Science and Modern Thought, page 27, informs us that, quote, the total thickness of known strata is about 130,000 feet, or 25 miles. Of this, about 30,000 feet belong to the Laurentian, which is the oldest known stratified deposit, 18,000 to the Cambrian, and 22,000 to the Silurian. These form together what is known as the primary or Paleozoic epoch, Mr. Lang is very careful to omit the names of those who know strata for a depth of 25 miles. Can it be that he has been down there himself? If so, we may expect to have further revelations as to the contents of the bowels of the earth. But no, he cannot have been there, for he tells us a little further on, page 37. Quote, "At this rate of increase, water would boil at a depth of 10,000 feet, and iron and all other metals would be melted before we reached 100,000 feet. We are thus satisfied that the gifted author was not actually there, or he would have been melted in company with iron and all other metals. This is a relief, and enables us to at once and forever dispose of his wild theories as baseless assumptions. In a certain case before the magistrate, the culprit hardly liked to say that the witness against him was telling a lie, so he mildly said that the witness was handling the truth very carelessly. When Mr. Lang has the impertinence to tell us what lies below the surface of the earth for a depth of 25 miles, we are bound to say that he handles the truth in a careless and most reprehensible manner. With the usual unqualified manner for which scientists have become famous, Mr. Lang goes on to say, quote, "Reasoning from these facts, assuming the rate of change in the forms of life to have been the same formerly, Lyell has arrived at the conclusion that geology requires a period of not less than 200 million of years to account for the phenomena which it discloses. To reason from facts, and then to assume something which in its very essence is utterly incapable of proof, is bad enough. But to miscall fictions facts, and then to add on to them whatever assumption is necessary to maintain the result in keeping with the theory with which the start was made, is so atrocious that we are again forced to the conclusion that geologists are lost in the fogs of their own creation, and cannot find their way through the millions of ages of their own imagination to anything having the remotest bit of truth in it. Once more, and I have done with Mr. Lang and his geology, he informs us in the work already referred to that, quote, "The law of gravity, which is the foundation of most of what we call the natural laws of geological action, has certainly prevailed, as will be shown later, through the enormous periods of geological time, and far beyond this we can discern it operating in those astronomical changes by which cosmic matter has been condensed into nebulae, nebulae into suns, throwing off planets, and planets throwing off satellites, as they cooled and contracted. The laws of geological action being based on a myth, the laws of gravitation, geology itself may be thrown off into space without any ill effects being felt anywhere. Geology and astronomy, as at present taught by the schoolmen, are nothing more than fables." Hear what The Future of February 1892 says, quote, "Astronomers are very fond of boasting of the wonderful exactness of their science, and that it is based on the principles of incontrovertible mathematics, and of ridiculing astrology as a pseudo-science. The exactness belongs to practical and not to theoretical astronomy. For example, when the writer learnt the principles of astronomy at school, he was taught that the sun was exactly 95 millions of miles from the earth. Nowadays, astronomers say that this was an error, and that the sun is only 92 millions of miles distant. Newton made the sun's distance to be 28 millions of miles. Kepler made it 12 millions. Martin 81 million, and Meyer 104 millions. Dr. Woodhouse, who was professor of astronomy at Cambridge about 50 years ago, was so candid as to admit the weakness of the Newtonian speculations. Woodhouse wrote, "However perfect our theory, and however simply and satisfactorily the Newtonian hypothesis may seem to us to account for all the celestial phenomena, yet we are here compelled to admit the astounding truth that if our premises be disputed and our facts challenged, the whole range of astronomy does not contain the proofs of its own accuracy." The horizon. According to tables of curvature compiled to suit the mathematical factors and tentative formulas employed in the imaginary geodetic operations, which have from time to time been conducted in observatories, the horizon of an observer is distant or near according to the greatness or otherwise of his elevation above the surface of the supposed globe. If he stands 24 feet above sea level, he is said to be in the center of a circle which bounds his vision, the radius of which in any direction on a clear day is 6 miles. A local gentleman tells me that he has watched a boat race in New Zealand, seeing the boats all the way out and home, the distance being 9 miles from where he was standing on the beach. I have seen the hull of a steamer, with the naked eye, at an elevation of not more than 24 feet, at a distance of 12 miles, and in taking observations along the South African coast, have sometimes had an horizon of at least 20 miles, at an elevation of 20 feet only. The distance of the horizon or vanishing point, where the sky appears to touch the earth and sea, is determined largely by the weather, and when that is clear by the power of our vision. This is proved by the fact that the telescope will increase the distance of the horizon very greatly, and bring objects into view which are entirely beyond the range of vision of the unaided eye. But as no telescope can pierce a segment of water, the legitimate conclusion we are forced to arrive at is that the surface of water is level, and that therefore the shape of the world cannot be globular, and on such a flat or level surface, the greater the elevation of the observer, the longer will his range of vision be, and thus the farther he can see. On the term level, advocates of the globular form of the world often fall back on the meaning of the term level, affirming that a level surface means an even surface and not a horizontal or flat one. That is to say that a convex surface, if free from irregularities, is even or level. In Nuttall's Standard Dictionary, 1892 edition, page 409, the following is the definition of level. Quote, horizontal, even, flat, on the same line of plane. This shows that level is the same as horizontal or flat, and could not possibly apply to a convex surface. In the Cruise of the Falcon by E.F. Knight, the following occurs on page 2 of volume 2. Quote, there are no curves on the way, the rails being carried in one perfectly straight line across the level plains. Level here means flat or horizontal, as the plains in South America are known to be for thousands of square miles. Robinson's New Navigation and Surveying, page 25, says, quote, the spirit level, which is usually on the underside of the surveyor's transit instrument, is used to determine a horizontal line. A horizontal line is at right angles to a vertical. It is a level line. The following is from the same work, page 33. Quote, to adjust a theodolite, measure very carefully the distance between two stations, and set the instrument halfway between them. Now bring the level near to one of the stations, level it carefully and sight the rod. Note the number on the rod, say 6 feet, and have the rod man go to the other station, and place his target on the rod just 6 feet. When the telescope is turned upon it, the horizontal spider line ought to just coincide with the target, and will, if the instrument is level or in perfect adjustment. From the foregoing, it is very clear that the level means horizontal and cannot mean convex. G.F. Chambers, in his Story of the Solar System, pages 84 and 85, quotes Sir H. Holland as seeing the eclipsed moon with the sun above the horizon. I quote the following from Mr. Chambers, quote, this spectacle requires, however, a combination of circumstances rarely occurring, a perfectly clear eastern and western horizon, and an entirely level intervening surface, such as that of the sea or the African desert, unquote. In a lunar eclipse such as described, the sun is distant from the moon half a circle, or 180 degrees, both luminaries being 90 degrees from the observer, so that on a convex surface it would be impossible to see both bodies at the same time, but quite possible from a level or horizontal surface, which actually was the case. To see about 6,000 miles to the sun on the one side and about 6,000 miles to the moon on the other side, one would require to be projected 4,000 miles into space, above the horizon of the globe, in order to overcome the convexity in the distance. Thus, level, we are again assured, means horizontal or flat, or on the same line of plane, as the dictionary informs us. In The Voyage of a Naturalist by Charles Darwin, page 328, the following is stated, quote, I was reminded of the pampas of Buenos Aires by seeing the disk of the rising sun intersected by an horizon level as that of the ocean." Unquote. The surface here referred to was a flat one, and such are called llanos or level fields in South America. Level, therefore, signifies flat or horizontal. Lighthouses. The distance at which lights can be seen at sea entirely disposes of the idea that we are living on a huge ball. From a tract, The Bible versus Science, by J.C. Acaster, Hull, I extract the following. Quote, "A lighthouse on the Isle of Wight, 180 feet high, St. Catherine's, has recently been fitted with an electric light of such penetrating power, 7,000,000 candles, that it can be seen 42 miles. At that distance, according to modern science, the vessel would be 996 feet below the horizon." Extract from a letter written by a passenger on board the Iberia, Orient Line RMS. Quote, "At noon on Thursday, 27th of September, we were 169 miles from Port Said. By the ship's log, our rate of steaming was 324 miles in 24 hours. At 12 p.m. we were alongside the lighthouse at Port Said, it having become visible at 7:30, when it was about 58 miles away. It is an ordinary tower, about as high as the tower at Springhead, 60 feet, lit by electricity." Unquote. According to modern science, the vessel would be 2,182 feet below the horizon. Extract from Manx Sun, July 24th, 1894. Quote, "The weather of late has been very fine. It was a splendid sight, on Sunday evening, to see the land and air in Cumberland, so clear that houses could be seen with the naked eye, and the smoke from Whitehaven and other towns could be seen very distinctly. Ramsey Bay appeared as if it was enclosed by the surrounding land, from Blackcomb to the Point of Ayr, Welney Light being seen distinctly, distance 45 miles." End quote. In February 1894, a discussion on the subject of the shape of the world was carried on in the columns of the Cape Argus, Cape Town, by the writer on the one side and three antagonists on the other. From the evidence of the edition, the paper in a footnote to the first letter of Ancient Mariner, that Dasson Island light that had been seen from the beach road at Sea Point, it was shown that water is level. This light is 155 feet above sea level at its focal plane, and according to the published report of the Inspector of Public Works for 1893, had been seen from the bridge of a mail steamer more than 40 miles away. This Ancient Mariner did not believe, and asked if anything had gone wrong with the shape of the earth hereabouts. One of his supporters, in a letter to the paper, after the editor had stated that the light had been seen from the beach road at Sea Point, 33 miles away, stated that by climbing a hill so many feet the light might be seen. Thus will ignorant prejudice flaunt itself in the face of truth. If the earth were a globe, it is evident that Dasson Island light could not be seen from a steamer's bridge 40 miles away, nor from an elevation of 20 feet at a distance of 33 miles. In the former case, allowing 40 feet for altitude of observer, the light would be 871 feet below the horizon, and in the latter 551 feet below. At the close of the controversy, I challenged Ancient Mariner to test the case by an appeal to an experiment on the waters of Table Bay, and am still waiting an acceptance of that challenge. I am now credibly informed that the Bluff light, Natal or Natal, has been seen at sea from a distance of 30 miles. This light is 282 feet above sea level, and should, according to the globe theory, have been 298 feet below the horizon, allowing 20 feet for the height of the observer. Another, and an unconscious witness to the fact of the horizontality of water, is Mr. Smith of Cape Point, as the following shows. A light from afar. To the editor of the Cape Times. Quote, "Sir, at 9 o'clock this evening, the Danger Point light was distinctly visible to the naked eye from the homestead at Cape Point, about 150 feet above sea level, this being the first occasion, since the erection of the Danger Point lighthouse, on which the flashes of light have been noticed by myself. The light must be most powerful to be seen from a distance of over 50 miles on a clear night. I timed half a minute interval between each 3 quick flashes. Cape Point, August 22nd, 1894. I am an etc. A. E. Smith. In a letter from the engineer of public works dated Cape Town, 2nd February, 1898, I am informed that, quote, the focal plane of Point Danger Lighthouse is elevated 150 feet above high water level. According to this, therefore, if the world be a globe, the light should have been 1,666 feet below Mr. Smith's line of sight. In answers of 2nd May, 1896, the following appears, quote, the steeple or stump, as it is locally called, of the parish church of St. Botolph at Boston, on the southeast coast of Lincolnshire, near the Wash, has long been utilized as a lighthouse. The tower is 290 feet in height and resembles that of Antwerp Cathedral, being crowned by a beautiful octagonal lantern. This tower, being invisible 40 miles distance, serves as a lighthouse to guide mariners when entering what are called the Boston and Lynn Deeps. According to globular principles, this light should be hidden below the horizon for nearly 800 feet. From Music and Morals by H.R. Haweis, I extracted the following. Quote, the Antwerp spire is 403 feet high from the foot of the tower. Strasbourg measures 468 feet from the level of the sea, but less than 403 feet from the level of the plain. By the clear morning light from the steeple at Notre Dame at Antwerp, the panorama can hardly be surpassed. 126 steeples may be counted, far and near. Facing northward, the Scheldt winds away until it loses itself in a white line, which is none other than the North Sea. By the aid of a telescope, ships can be distinguished out on the horizon, and the captains declare they can see the lofty spire at 150 miles distance. Middelburg at 75 miles, Vliezing 65 miles, are also visible from the steeple. Looking towards Holland, we can distinguish Breda and Walladu, each about 54 miles off. The above spire would be out of sight a mile below the horizon at a distance of 150 miles, and as no telescope can piece a segment of water, the conclusion is that water is level. The Earth Review of July 1894 says, the captain of the SS Milo, referring to the question as to how far a powerful light can be seen, says, the other day when off Skagen, the rays from Hansholmen Lighthouse were distinctly visible, though the light was fully 72 miles away. Mr. B. wrote and asked how the light could be seen unless the lighthouse was 3,500 feet above sea level. This is the official reply he received. Quote, Editorial Department, Titbits, December 21st, 1892. The paragraph you refer to was sent to me by the captain of the SS Milo, and he vouched for its accuracy. Under these circumstances, I cannot enter into a discussion as to the possibility of his being able to see it or not. P.S. Mr. B. allowed that the reported observation was made from a masthead 100 feet above sea level. In the Argus Annual for 1894, it is stated on pages 207 and 271, the Natal or Natal Bluff light, 292 feet above water level, has been seen at a distance of 30 miles. According to globe measurements, it should have been about 300 feet below the line of sight. The Natal Mercury of 18th July 1898 states, the Cape Lagulas lighthouse is to be reconstructed to allow the introduction of a flash light. A lighthouse erected 2 miles from Fish River has been completed. The tower is 33 feet high and 238 feet above sea level, and the flashlight is visible for over 50 miles. This light would be 1,400 feet below an observer's line of sight at an elevation of 28 feet, if the world was a globe. The following is extracted from Scraps of 27 August 1898. Quote, I have recently received the following letter, which I confess fogs me just about as much as the writer of it complains of being fogged. Sir, in your issue, number 772, you give an account of the lighthouse at New York, Liberty enlightening the world. You say the light can be seen 60 miles away at sea, and I think you must be mistaken. A textbook I have by me on surveying, and leveling, gives 8 inches per mile, actually 7.962 inches, as the correction to be made for curvature of the Earth's surface in setting out canals, railways, etc., varying inversely with the square of the distance. Thus, 60 by 60 by 8 divided by 12 equals 2,400 feet, and making allowance for the light being 326 feet above sea level, it should be 2,074 feet below the horizon at 60 miles. Now, 1. Either your figures are wrong, or 2. The weight of the statue has flattened the Earth for 60 miles roundabout, or 3. Surveyors do not allow 8 inches for curvature, and let their canals and railways stick out over the side of the Earth like gigantic fishing rods. I confess I am in a fog. Can you enlighten me in your Facts and Fancies column? Yours truly, Foggy. End quote. I won't attempt to analyze Foggy's fogging calculations, but he is certainly very wrong. Any navigator will tell you that the horizon is visible at about 15 miles from the hurricane deck of a steamer, at 20 from the bridge deck, and at a proportionally greater distance from the masthead. But beyond this, you have to remember the added penetration given to lighthouse lights by means of refraction and reflection. End quote. A light can only be seen on the surface of a globe, at a distance the square of which multiplied by 8 inches nearly is equal to its height. This applies no matter how powerful the light may be, because no light can pierce the water, nor can the natural eye, with or without a telescope glass, do so. But, says someone, there is no allowance made for refraction in any of the foregoing calculations. That is quite true, but constitutes no valid objection in the light of the following extract from the Encyclopedia Britannica, article Leveling. Quote, "We suppose the visual rays to be a straight line, whereas, on account of the unequal densities of the air at different distances from the earth, the rays of light are incurvated by refraction. The effect of this is to lessen the difference between the true and apparent levels, but in such an extremely variable and uncertain manner that if any constant or fixed allowance is made for it in formula or tables, it will often lead to a greater error than what it was intended to obviate. For, though the refraction may at a mean compensate for about 1/7 of the curvature of the earth, it sometimes exceeds 1/5, and at other times does not amount to 1/15. We have, therefore, made no allowance for refraction in the foregoing formulae. We are fairly entitled to conclude, therefore, from the reliable data furnished as to how far lights at sea can be seen, that the world is again an extended plane, and not the globe of astronomical speculation." The Midnight Sun. M. Paul B. Duchaillu published a few years ago a work entitled The Land of the Midnight Sun, of which the following are extracts. The sun at midnight is always north of the observer, on account of the position of the earth. It seems to travel around in a circle, requiring 24 hours for its completion, it being noon when it reaches the greatest elevation, and midnight at the lowest. Its ascent and descent are so imperceptible at the pole, and the variations so slight, that it sinks south very slowly, and its disappearance below the horizon is almost immediately followed by its reappearance. We have here spoken as if the observer were on a level with the horizon, but should he climb a mountain, the sun of course will appear higher, and should he, instead of traveling 15 miles north, climb about 220 feet above the sea level each day, he would see it in the same as if he had gone north. Consequently, if he stood at the Arctic Circle at that elevation, and had an unobstructed view of the horizon, he would see the sun 1 day sooner. Hence tourists from Haparanda prefer going to Avasaksa, a hill 680 feet above the sea, from which, though 8 or 10 miles south of the Arctic Circle, they can see the midnight sun for 3 days. As the voyage drew to a close and we approached the upper end of the Gulf of Bothnia, the twilight had disappeared, and between the settling and rising of the sun hardly 1 hour elapsed. Haparanda is 65 degrees 51 minutes north latitude and 41 miles south of the Arctic Circle. It is 1 degree and 18 minutes farther north than Archangel, and in the same latitude as the most northern part of Iceland. The sun rises on the 21st of June at 12:01 a.m. and sets at 11:37 p.m. From the 22nd to the 25th of June, the traveler may enjoy the sight of the midnight sun from Avisaxa, a hill 680 feet high and about 45 miles distant, on the other side of the stream. And should he be a few days later, by driving north on the high road, he may still have the opportunity of seeing it. If the earth be a globe, at midnight the eye would have to penetrate thousands of miles of land and water, even at 65 degrees north latitude, in order to see the sun at midnight. That the sun can be seen for days together in the far north during the northern summer proves that there is something very seriously wrong with the globular hypothesis. Besides this, how is it that the midnight sun is never seen in the south during the southern summer? Cook penetrated as far as south 71 degrees. Weddell in 1893 reached as far as 74 degrees, and Sir James C. Ross in 1841 and 1842 reached the 78th parallel. But I am not aware that any of these navigators have left it on record that the sun was seen at midnight in the south. Captain Woodside of the American barkentine Echo at Cape Town on 26 June 1898 reports that he had been a good deal in the Great Southern Ocean, and often when in latitude 62 degrees south, he has had a kind of daylight all night, but not sufficient to read by. But the midnight sun was never seen. Since writing the foregoing, I have received from the Secretary of the Royal Belgian Geographical Society a paper entitled Expedition Antarctique Belge. In this paper it is stated by Lieutenant de Gerlache, the commander of the expedition, that on 17th May the sun set and was not seen above our horizon again until 21st July. This was during the severest part of the winter at latitude 71 degrees 36 minutes south. On pages 9 and 10 of the same pamphlet, it is stated that the ship quitted her winter quarters on the 14th February. She had thus been a winter and a summer in the ice at that latitude. During the winter, the extraordinary phenomena of total darkness caused by the total disappearance of the sun for 2 months is duly recorded, and had the sun been seen at midnight in the summer, it is only natural and reasonable that such another extraordinary phenomenon should have been chronicled, but there is not one word in the pamphlet about the matter. We conclude, therefore, that there is no midnight sun in the south. The midnight sun can be seen in the north during the summer at 66 degrees of latitude, and if there be the same extraordinary phenomenon in the south, it must have been seen at the latitude the Belgica reached much sooner and longer than it is in the north at latitude 66. Motions of the earth. In The Story of the Heavens by Sir R. Ball, the following accounts of the motions of the earth globe are given, page 3. It became certain that whatever were the shape of the earth, it was at all events something detached from all other bodies, and poised without visible support in space. Page 6, quote, Ptolemy saw how this mighty globe was poised in what he believed to be the center of the universe. Page 7, quote, Copernicus proved that the appearances presented in the daily rising and setting of the sun and stars could be accounted for by the supposition that the earth rotated. The second great principle, which has conferred immortal glory on Copernicus, assigned to the earth its true position in the universe. Copernicus transferred the center to the sun, and he established the somewhat humiliating truth that our earth is merely a planet. Page 87, quote, The discovery that our earth must be a globe isolated in space was in itself a mighty exertion of human intellect. And page 517, we know that the earth rotates on its axis once every day. After all this unsound speculation, of which we know every line to be false, It is somewhat amusing to listen to another professor of equal authority with the Astronomer Royal of Ireland. Professor J. Norman Lockyer, in his Astronomy, Section 4, says, "You have to take it as proved that the Earth moves. Day and night are the best proofs that the Earth does really spin. Without this spinning there could be no day and night, so that the regular succession of day and night is caused by this spinning. Hence the appearances connected with the rising and setting of the sun may be due either to our Earth being at rest and the sun and stars traveling around it, or the Earth itself turning round while the sun and stars are at rest. Our Earth seems to give more trouble to our astronomers than all the heavenly bodies put together. If, as Professor Lockyer says, either the Earth is at rest and the stars moving, or the stars at rest and the Earth moving, how is it that the wise men of the observatories have never once attempted to ascertain data to prove whether it is the Earth or the stars that move? How is it that they are content to go on year after year, laboring under what is at best but a supposition that the Earth moves, when the phenomena, according to their own showing, may be as well accounted for, either by the Earth being at rest and the sun and stars moving, or the sun and stars being at rest and the Earth moving? In Wonders of the Sun and Moon and Stars, by R. Russell, it is stated that, quote, "The speed of the surface of the Earth in performing its rotations is 1,526 feet per second. Great as that speed is, it is slow when compared to the Earth's progress in its orbit, which is at the rate of 18 miles per second, or more than 65,000 miles per hour." Then in The Story of the Heavens, page 429, we are informed by Sir R. Ball that, quote, "Every half hour we are about 10,000 miles nearer to the constellation of Lyra. The sun in his system must travel at the present rate for more than 1,000,000 years before we have crossed the abyss between our present position and the frontiers of Lyra or Lyra." End quote. Quote, Sun, Moon, and Stars by A. Giberne states that it is the Earth that moves and not the sun. It is the Earth that moves and not the stars. End quote. From these extracts, the reader is given to take instruction by those who have made astronomy their life study, and therefore ought to know that in 1 hour the Earth rotates over 1,000 miles, revolves around the sun over 60,000 miles, and rushes through space towards the constellation Lyra, a distance of 20,000 miles, a distance of 20 million miles. The total rate of rotation, revolution, and gyration amounting to no less than to no less than 90,000 miles an hour. This casts a total eclipse over all that Jules Verne ever wrote. Put together all the imaginary exploits in the air specially written to interest the young. Add to this all the wonderful adventures of airships recorded in The Daughter of the Revolution, and tack on to this all the wild and impossible things found in current libraries of fiction, and I venture to say that the grand total will record nothing so utterly impossible or so supremely ridiculous as this modern scientific delusion of a globe spinning away in space in several different directions at the same time, at rates of speed which no man is able to grasp, with the inhabitants some hanging heads down and others at various angles to suit the inclination. Write down all the swindles that ever were perpetrated, name all the hoaxes you ever heard of or read about, include all the impostures and bubbles ever exposed, make a list of all the snares that popular credulity could ever be exposed to, and you will fail in getting within sight of, or hearing of, an imposture so gross, a hoax so ingenious, or a bubble of such gigantic proportions as have been perpetrated and forced upon unthinking multitudes in the name of science, and has proved incontrovertible fact by the expounders of modern astronomy. Again and again have their theories been combated and exposed, but as often have the majority, who do not think for themselves, accepted the popular thing. No less an authority in his time than the celebrated Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe argued that if the earth revolves in an orbit round the sun, the change in the relative position of the stars thus necessarily occasioned could not fail to be noticed. In The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, by Dr. Draper, pages 175 and 176, the matter is referred to in the following words. Quote, among the arguments brought forward against the Copernican system at the time of its promulgation was one by the great Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, originally urged by Aristarchus against the Pythagorean system, to the effect that if, as was alleged, the earth moves around the sun, there ought to be a change in the relative position of the stars. They should seem to separate as we approach them, or to close together as we recede from them. At that time the sun's distance was greatly underestimated. Had it been known, as it is now, that the sun's distance exceeds 90 million miles, or that the diameter of the orbit is more than 180 million, that argument would doubtless have had very great weight. In reply to Tycho, it was said that since the parallax of a body diminishes as its distance increases, a star may be so far off that its parallax may be imperceptible. This answer proved to be correct. To the uninitiated, the words, "This answer proved to be correct," might seem to settle the matter, and while it must be admitted that parallax is diminished or increased according as the star is distant or near, parallax and direction are very different terms, and convey quite different meanings. Tycho stated that the direction of the stars would be altered. His critics replied that the distance gave no sensible difference of parallax. This may be set down as ingenious, but it is no answer to the question, which has remained unanswered to this hour, and is unanswerable. If the earth is at a given point in space on, say, January 1st, and according to present-day science at a distance of 190 million miles from that point 6 months afterwards, it follows that the relative position and direction of the stars will have greatly changed, however small the angle of parallax may be. That this great change is nowhere apparent, and has never been observed, incontestably proves that the earth is at rest, that it does not move in an orbit round the sun. That the earth does not rotate on its axis is proved by the fact that no observer on the surface of a globe could see halfway round it, or for a distance of thousands of miles on either side of him, as he would require to do in order to see round a circle of 180 degrees, to view the setting sun and the rising moon at one time. Sir Henry Holland, in his Recollections of Past Life, says that, quote, on 20th April, 1837, the moon rose eclipsed before the sun had set. Now, on a globe of 25,000 statute miles equatorial circumference, one has to be 24 feet above sea level to get a horizon of 6 miles, the curvature being 8 inches to the mile and varying inversely with the square of the distance. We are thus taught to believe that what appears at all times of the day to be half a circle, or about 180 degrees, is in reality only a few miles, as the earth rotates against the sun, and thus deceives us. But the phenomena of a lunar eclipse requires, according to astronomical doctrine, that the earth shall be exactly midway between sun and moon, to shut off the light of the sun, and thus to darken the moon. These two bodies being then, according to the astronomer, opposite each other, and the earth between, must each be 90 degrees, or a quarter of a circle distant from an observer on the earth's surface, that is, half a circle from one to the other. So that what astronomy, on the one hand, teaches is only a few miles distant, the horizon, is thus seen to be, according to its own showing, half a circle, for the sun is at one side of one quadrant, and the moon at the other side of another. If therefore the observer be on the equator when the phenomenon occurs, he can see, according to astronomical measurement, over 6,000 miles on either side of him, east and west. If in north or south latitude, he would see correspondingly less, but thousands of miles in every case. But, on the other hand, according to the popular theory, he would have to be hoisted 4,000 miles away in space for such a thing to be possible. The fact of lunar eclipses having been observed when sun and moon were both above the horizon at the time of the eclipse, and thus that the observer pierced, with the unaided eye, a distance of thousands of miles on either side of him, about half a circle, proves that the earth does not rotate, and that it is not the globe of popular belief. Sir Henry Holland further informs us that this spectacle requires, however, a combination of circumstances rarely occurring: a perfectly clear eastern or western horizon, and an entirely level intervening surface, such as that of the sea or the African desert. It is this level intervening surface that defies all astronomical attempts to make it convex, and proves beyond the possibility of a doubt that the earth is an extended plane and not a globe. Furthermore, if the earth's globe rotates on its axis at the terrific rate of 1,000 miles an hour, such an immense mass would of necessity cause a tremendous rush of wind in the space it occupied. The wind would all go one way, and anything like clouds which got within the sphere of influence of the rotating sphere would have to go the same way. The fact that the earth is at rest is proved by kite flying. The following from the American Exporter of November 1897 illustrates this. Quote, "Recently a very interesting experiment was made in high kite flying at Boston from the Blue Hill Observatory, when the highest altitude ever reached by a kite was obtained. The top kite reached a height of 10,016 feet above sea level, or 8,386 feet above the summit of the hill. At the highest point reached, the temperature was 38 degrees, while at the ground it was 63 degrees. Above 5,000 feet the wind was from the west, while at the ground there was a southerly wind. Astronomers are not agreed about the depth of the Earth's atmosphere, but the lowest estimate is 45 miles. Therefore, everything within the atmosphere would be subject to the gale of wind produced by the mad whirligig of the rotating globe. When, however, we know that above 5,000 feet the wind was from the west, while at the ground there was a southerly wind, the fact of the earth being at rest again dawns on us. How could there be two different directions of the wind at a distance of only 5,000 feet apart, if globular hypotheses are anywhere near the truth? Spin a top and it will be seen that the rotation of the top causes the air within its sphere of rotation to go all one way. Let imagination picture to the mind what force air would have which is set in motion by a spherical body of 8,000 miles diameter, which in 1 hour was spinning around 1,000 miles, rushing through space 65,000 miles, and gyrating across the heavens 20,000 miles. Then let conjecture endeavor to discover whether the inhabitants on such a globe could keep their hair on. Talk about Jules Verne. He is not in it with the expounders of this most exact of all the sciences. A. E. Skellum says, quote, "The following experiment has been tried many times, and the reasonable deductions from it are entirely against any theory of motion. A loaded cannon was set vertical by plumb line and spirit level and fired. The average time the ball was in the air was 28 seconds. On several occasions the ball returned to the mouth of the cannon and never fell more than 2 feet from its base, as shown in Figure 1. Now let us see what the result would be if the earth were a rapidly rotating sphere. The ball would partake of two motions, the one from the cannon in vertical, and the other from the earth from east to west, from west to east, and would arrive at B, Figure 2, while it had been ascending the earth, with the cannon, would have gone on to C. In descending, it would have no impulse from the earth's motion or from the cannon, and would fall in a straight line at C. But during the time it were falling, the earth with the cannon would have traveled on to D, and the ball would fall, allowing the world's rotation to be 600 miles per hour in England, more than 2 miles behind the cannon." The moon. According to current science, the moon was once a piece of molten rock fractured off from the Earth, when the Earth was in a soft or plastic condition. Its origin is thus stated by Sir R. Ball in The Story of the Heavens, page 520. Quote, "There is the gravest reason to believe that the moon was at some very early period fractured off from the Earth, when the Earth was in a soft or plastic condition. At this epoch the Earth rotated 29 times on its axis, while the moon completed one circuit. But whether the epoch, is to be reckoned in hundreds of thousands of years, in millions of years, or in tens of millions of years, must be left in great degree to conjecture. Conjecture, in this case, has to choose between hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of years. Ample scope, one must admit. In the same volume, page 52, the insignificant size of the moon, as compared to the stars, is set forth. In the same volume, page 52, the insignificant size of the moon as compared to the stars is set forth. Every one of the thousands of stars that can be seen with the unaided eye is enormously larger than our satellite. In Wonders of the Sun, Moon, and Stars, the same idea is announced thus. Quote, "The luminary which appears to us next in importance to the sun is the moon, and for practical purposes, it, of course, is so, but, considered from a broad astronomical point of view, the moon is exceedingly insignificant, being the smallest of all the luminaries visible to us with the naked eye. The diameter of the moon is only 2,160 miles. The moon is said to be a reflector of the sun's light, and to have no light of her own, as the following shows. Sir R. Ball, in his Story of the Heavens, pages 50 and 56, says, quote, "The brilliancy of the moon arises solely from the light of the sun, which falls on the not self-luminous substance of the moon. The sunlight will thus pass over the earth to the moon, and the moon will be illuminated." End quote. The speculation regarding the origin of the lesser light that rules the night is in keeping with the other impossible notion concerning the earth being shot off from the sun in remote ages. It is so purely nonsensical that it may well be relegated to oblivion without further ado. As to size, the moon is next in importance to the sun, if, indeed, she is not quite as large, and many times larger than any star in the heavens, including all the planets ever seen by the eye of man. Both the distance and size of most of the objects in the heavens may be measured with a high degree of accuracy. It only requires to be known that the object is vertical to a certain part of the world at a certain time, when the observer must take a position, which could be ascertained by previous experiment, where the angular distance of the object is 45 degrees. A baseline measured from that position to the point at which the object was vertical, at the moment of observation, will be the same length as the distance of the object from the Earth's surface. Size, except in the case of very small stars, may be as easily determined. Let the instrument with which the angular distance was taken be graduated to degrees, minutes, and seconds, the minutes and seconds corresponding to miles and 60ths of miles on the Earth's surface. Having carefully adjusted the instrument, bring the image of the lower limb of the object to be measured down to the horizon, and note the reading on the instrument. Now bring the upper limb in contact with the horizon, and the difference of the reading will be the diameter of the object. It would, of course, require a very finely adjusted instrument, and one graduated to say the 100th part of a second to measure some of the smaller stars. Instead of the diameter of the moon being 2160 miles, as we are informed by the men of science of today, it is, by the above process, found to be about 32 nautical miles in diameter. Then, as to the moon being a non-luminous body, and receiving all its light from the sun, astronomy is as hopelessly wrong as in most other of its fanciful statements. If the reader has taken notice of reflectors, he will have seen that they are either flat, where angles are involved, or concave, but never convex. A convex surface cannot concentrate and reflect light, but a concave surface does this. Hence all reflectors, where angles are not involved, are concave. The moon is a globe. It is convex, and therefore cannot reflect light to any extent. Then, if the moon could reflect the light, it would also reflect the heat of the sun. But we know that moonlight is cold instead of warm. In Noad's Lectures on Chemistry, it is said, quote, "The light of the moon, though concentrated by the most powerful burning glass, is incapable of raising the temperature of the most delicate thermometer." The Lancet says, quote, "The moon's rays, when concentrated, actually reduce the temperature upon a thermometer more than 8 degrees." And that is from the Lancet. When light and heat are received by a reflector, light and heat are reflected, as the reader may prove for himself, by testing the matter with a petroleum lamp and a reflector. If a red light be projected onto the surface of a reflector, the reflection of it is red. In fine, reflectors reflect just what they receive. If fish be hung up to dry in the sun, they will be preserved, but if exposed to the moon will be rendered putrid in one night. The same applies to fruits, etc., clearly proving that the light of the moon cannot be of the same nature as that of the sun, and furthermore that the moon shines by its own light. The nearest approach to moonlight is phosphorescent light, and if the moon and stars be observed through a telescope, it will be noticed that starlight and moonlight, except in a few cases, are identical, the size of the star determining its brilliancy, on the principle that the larger the star, the greater will its brilliancy be. Sun, Moon, and Stars, page 57, says, quote, "That soft, silvery light, so unlike sunlight, or gaslight, or any other kind of light seen upon the earth." The theory that moonlight is only reflected sunlight requires that the illuminated part of the moon be always next the sun. Unfortunately for the theory, however, this is not the case. If the moon be observed from last quarter to new, it will be found that for a portion of one day, immediately before new moon, the dark part of the moon is turned towards the sun, and at new moon the sun is still to the eastward of the moon, which is illuminated on its western surface. On 10th August 1898, at Durban, Natal, the moon rose at On 10th August 1898, at Durban, Natal, the moon rose at okay. On 10th August 1898, at Durban, Natal, the moon rose at 1:7 a.m. and by sunrise 6:35 was high in the heavens, showing about half on her eastern surface. On 15th, moon rose 4:58 a.m., sunrise 6:30, with a very small portion of eastern limb illuminated, but the whole circle was distinctly visible. On 16th, moon rose at 5:32 a.m., sunrise 6:29, with the dark part towards the sun. On 17th, moon rose at 6:4 a.m., sunrise 6:28, 24 minutes before the sun. New moon same day, 0:35 p.m., the moon's illuminated western limb being turned away from the sun, which was to the eastward. On 18th, moon rose 6:36 a.m., sunrise 6:27, and the sun was thus ahead of the moon, and on the illuminated side, having passed her between the hours of sunset on the 17th and sunrise on the 18th. Anyone who cares to take the time and make the necessary observations may satisfy himself on this point. The almanac shows that at every new moon the sun is to the east of the moon, which is illuminated on her western surface, clearly proving that the moon is a self-luminous body, and not a reflector of sunlight. But how about the phases of the moon if she is self-luminous? If the moon be observed, it will be apparent that she rotates from west to east in order to produce the various phases, each phase appearing in spite of the position of the sun. This shows that she is luminous on half her surface, the dark half being towards us when she is invisible. Take a wooden ball and rub half its surface with a solution of phosphorus and olive oil. Place the ball in a dark room and cause it to rotate, and all the phases representing those of the moon will be manifested.